Picture a project manager in a busy office in Bangalore who is presenting a new app designed to a senior executive. The project manager has spent weeks refining the code, but the executive immediately cuts them off, slams a notebook on the table, and loudly complains that the color scheme is all wrong, despite previously approving the brand guidelines. This is a classic difficult stakeholder scenario. In our world, we often label these individuals as problematic, but the technical definition of a stakeholder is simply anyone who has a vested interest in the project. When we call them difficult, what we are really identifying is a disconnect in expectations, values, or communication styles. In simple words, a difficult stakeholder is just someone frustrated, anxious, or feeling unheard. They aren't trying to ruin your day, they are usually trying to protect their own goals, and they just don't know how to express that in a constructive way. You have probably seen this at the office, where someone becomes aggressive because they are under extreme pressure from their own bosses, or they fear that your project might actually make their job harder. When you change your lens from this person is a villain to this person is a human with a problem, you stop reacting to their anger and start looking for the root cause. So, now that we've mastered the realization that difficult behavior is usually a symptom of deeper pressure, you might be wondering how we shift from being a target of that behavior to being a partner in solving it. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the practice of active and empathetic listening. Think back to that executive in Bengaluru. If the project manager simply argued back, "But you approved these colors last month," the situation would explode. Instead, a disciplined Agile practitioner takes a breath and asks, "I hear you are concerned about the brand impact. Can you help me understand what specific user feedback made you feel that way?" This is active listening. By definition, active listening is the practice of fully concentrating on, understanding, responding to, and then remembering what is being said. Simply put, it is listening to understand, not listening to respond. Most of us, when we are under fire, are already planning our comeback while the other person is still talking. That is a recipe for disaster. When you listen to a difficult stakeholder, your job is to strip away the harsh tone and identify the actual data hidden inside their complaint. Are they worried about the deadline? Are they worried about the budget? Are they worried about how they will look in front of their peers? When you repeat back their concerns in your own words, "So what I'm hearing is that you are worried the colors will make the app look too childish for our target corporate audience," you immediately drop the temperature of the room. You have acknowledged their pain, and that is often exactly what they needed to calm down. So, now that we have mastered the art of listening to extract the real concern, you might be wondering how we guide them back to a productive conversation without letting them walk all over our team's work. Well, that brings us right into our next step, the technique of reframing and negotiation. Imagine that the same project manager realizes the executive is worried about the app looking childish because the company's biggest investor is a traditional banking firm. The project manager doesn't just stick to the original plan or give in to changing everything. Instead, they reframe the conversation. They say, "I completely understand the need for a professional look to satisfy the banking investors. What if we keep the primary branding consistent but use these secondary muted color palettes for the internal dashboard, which would solve the professional look issue while keeping the main app navigation clear?" This is reframing. Technically, it is the process of presenting a situation in a new light to shift the focus from a conflict to a shared solution. In simple words, it is moving from my way versus your way to our way. You are taking the stakeholders' anxiety and turning it into a collaborative problem to be solved together. You are validating that their goal is your goal. When you show a stakeholder that you are working to protect their reputation, they stop seeing you as an obstacle and start seeing you as an ally. So now that we have mastered the skill of reframing conflicts into creative solutions, you might be wondering what happens when someone just isn't willing to talk things out calmly. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is setting healthy boundaries. Consider a situation where a stakeholder repeatedly tries to bypass the team's agreed upon priorities by calling members of the team late at night to demand urgent last-minute features. This is a classic boundary issue. In the professional world, boundaries are the established limits on what is acceptable in terms of communication, scope, and behavior. Simply put, boundaries are the rules that allow you to do your job well without burning out. You have probably seen this at the office where everything is urgent, which means nothing is actually prioritized. If you don't say no to the chaos, you aren't being helpful. You are being irresponsible with your team's energy. A disciplined agile leader sets boundaries by saying, I understand this feature is important to you. To ensure we can deliver it with the quality the business expects, we need to add it to our backlog and prioritize it against our other goals during our next planning session. Let's look at the current list together. You aren't saying no to the request, you are saying yes to the process. You are protecting the team from distractions, which actually helps the stakeholder get a better result in the long run. So, now that we have mastered the necessity of firm but respectful boundaries, you might be wondering how we maintain these professional relationships when a stakeholder feels like their ego is being bruised. Well, that brings us right into our next step, the importance of managing up through transparency. Think of a stakeholder who is difficult because they don't have visibility into the daily realities of the project. They fear the worst because they don't see the progress. You start sending them a short, simple weekly report that highlights 3 things: what we finished, what we are working on next, and the one major risk we are managing. This is managing up through transparency. By definition, this is the process of proactively communicating the information that your leadership needs to make good decisions. In simple language, it's about showing your work. When you are transparent, you remove the stakeholder's fear of the unknown. People are rarely difficult when they know exactly what is happening, why it is happening, and when they can expect to see results. If you hide problems until they become disasters, of course your stakeholders will be difficult. They are panicked. But when you give them bad news early, accompanied by a plan to fix it, you earn their deep, long-term trust. You stop being the person who brings them surprises and start being the person who brings them solutions. So, now that we've mastered the art of managing up through consistent visibility, you might be wondering how we keep our own emotions in check during these high-pressure moments. Well, that brings us right into our next step, which is the practice of self-regulation and emotional intelligence. Think of a lighthouse in a storm. The waves are crashing, the wind is howling, but the lighthouse stands steady, providing the only guidance the ships have. As a Scrum Master, you are that lighthouse. You will deal with angry emails, tense meetings, and stakeholders who are having a very bad day. Self-regulation is your ability to monitor and control your own emotional responses so that you remain the calmest person in the room. Technically, it is a key component of emotional intelligence. In simple words, it is the pause between that person said something rude and how I choose to react. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be in control of your own reactions. When a stakeholder is yelling, the worst thing you can do is yell back. When you remain steady, it actually forces the other person to lower their volume to match your calm. You become the anchor for the entire team. We have moved through listening, reframing, setting boundaries, radical transparency, and finally maintaining your own calm. You now have the full toolkit to handle the most difficult people in your organization with confidence, turning conflict into a foundation for deeper professional trust and better project outcomes.